Presidents buried in Arlington National Cemetery, John Kennedy and William Howard Taft. There's only one president that's buried in the District of Columbia, and that's Woodrow Wilson, and he's right here. When Wilson stepped down from being president in 1921, he was a sick man and he was also broke. And some men took up a collection and raised about $100,000 to buy him a house about 8 blocks from here. A lot of money in 1921. Lovely house, and it's a great museum today. He wasn't buried right here. He was buried downstairs underneath the high altar. This part of the cathedral didn't exist in 1921. But in 1924, when he died, his family thought that because he was so interested in the cathedral, he used to come up here to watch the construction, he should be buried here, and he was. But in 1957, the young grandson that used to ride with him to come up and look at the cathedral was the dean of this cathedral. He was the boss here, and he arranged to have his grandfather brought from downstairs, upstairs, and placed right there. And on the side of that sarcophagus is the seal of the President of the United States, the seal of Princeton University, and the seal of the Governor of New Jersey. All important jobs that Wilson had in his lifetime. This window is probably one of the most spectacular in the cathedral. It's by a Hungarian artist named Bosani, and it shows the horror of war on the right and the beauty of peace on the left and the peace of Christ in the center. Wilson was very much involved in bringing about the Versailles Treaty, which ended World War I, and so he's memorialized in that window. Anybody recognize any of the faces in that window? Any of you have ever seen the movie Aladdin?
Oh yeah.
You see some faces in that look familiar? Yeah, Disney, who made Aladdin, went to this guy's studio in London and copied some of the faces for the movie. So, but we have the originals here in the window. Any questions for me? Okay. Horror of war on the right, beauty of peace on the left. Peace of Christ in the center. Let's step down this way. You want a tight schedule? You having a good time? Good. Yeah, just come up, come right up here, guys. We're standing at the crossing of the cathedral. It's where the main aisle, which is about 1/10 of a mile long, intersects with the transept aisle that goes from north to south. And this platform is where the altar is placed on Sunday, although you can see the high altar at the far east end. We're standing under the high tower of the cathedral. I said that's about 100 feet up. The tower itself goes another 200 feet above that. And the hill we're on is 300 feet high. So the tower is 300 feet high, the hill is 300 feet high. Where are my math wizards? How high is this building altogether? 300 and 300. Somebody tell me, come on. 300 and 300, how much is it? 600. Not a trick.
Oh.
It's the highest point in Washington, D.C. This building is physically not quite as tall as the Washington Monument or the Capitol, but because we have the higher ground, we are the highest point in the city. Up in that tower, there are 2 sets of bells. A 53 bell carillon that's played by a guy that has wooden clappers that he pushes, and they activate wooden clappers against the bells. Above him are hanging 10 peal bells. These are bells that are pulled by girls about the age of the girls in this group from the National Cathedral School for Girls and volunteers. Those bells weigh over 100,000 pounds. So you've got 100,000 pounds of weight above you. And you can see these pillars right here are 19 feet around. There are 4 of them. They're holding up that tower. And when we go downstairs into St. Joseph's Chapel below us, you'll see that they flail out to 27 feet around, and they get even larger as they go down towards the bedrock. So they're holding up an enormous amount of weight. In the Middle Ages, there were no seats in cathedrals. So the congregation would stand here, and they would be shielded by a screen called a rood screen, and that screen is symbolic of that. So there was a separation between the priests and the congregation. And the priests were saying the Mass in a language the people didn't understand. They were speaking in Latin, and the people may spoke French or Italian or German, but there was a big separation in the cathedrals. Any questions? Okay, let's step around on the side here. Stay with me if you will. Punch up here, if you will. There's a really strong connection between the Episcopal Church in the United States and the Anglican Church in England. And this beautiful pulpit behind me is symbolic of that. It's called the Canterbury pulpit. Now, Canterbury Cathedral is one of the oldest cathedrals in England. And are you guys in high school, or have you read the Canterbury Tales? Well, you may. And it's a story about pilgrims going to Canterbury Cathedral. In the 1890s, Canterbury Cathedral was undergoing a lot of renovation. And they heard that the cathedral was planned for Washington. So they took some of the stone they had brought from France for their construction and had this beautiful pulpit made and gave it to the cathedral here. And it came actually in 1903, long before the cathedral even started construction. So it was held in storage for a number of years before it was placed there. And the pulpit is carved, and around it is told the story in the carving of the translation of the Bible, first from Latin, first into Anglo-Saxon, and then into English. And in your history, you will learn that in the Middle Ages, the church was very opposed to giving the common people the Bible in their own language. They wanted to keep control over what it said, because most people couldn't read Latin. Only the priests and the elite could read Latin. So some of the men that translated the Bible into English were killed or sent into exile because they were trying to give the common people the Word of God in their own language. A lot of famous people have spoken from that pulpit. The Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, presidents of the United States. 3 days before he went to Tennessee in 1968, where he was assassinated, Martin Luther King gave his last sermon from that pulpit. We've got two more rose windows here. One that shows the Last Judgment, and one that shows the triumph of Christianity. This one over here was made by a fellow named Lawrence Saint. Saint was another very prolific stained glass artisan here, but he was also a chemist. So just after World War I, when the windows were being put back in the churches in France, after the terrible war, they had taken them out to protect them. They were putting them back in, and pieces of glass would break off. He went and collected those shards of glass and brought them back to his chemistry laboratory up in Huntington, Pennsylvania, and he reverse engineered what that glass was, because we didn't know how to make the colored glass that was made in the Middle Ages, the reds, the blues, the yellows, and the oranges. So he was able to make glass similar to what was made in the Middle Ages in the windows that he made. Any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
The man that made the colored glass, can you repeat his name?
Lawrence Saint.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Yes,
You
ma'am.
said earlier there were 231
Stained glass windows.
Is like that whole rose window up there, is that considered
That's
one window?
That's one
Okay.
window, yeah. In our towers out front, where you walked in, those towers, they have a number of very small windows, so not every window is large. All right, follow me up this way. Watch your step here, they've got some guys working. guys have to write a report on what you've done here? Good. So ask any questions you want. I'll be glad to try to answer them. We have 9 chapels in this cathedral, 5 on this level and 4 on the crypt level below. If you've been to a cathedral in Europe, you'd find that most of the big Gothic cathedrals, who are Catholic cathedrals, not Episcopal cathedrals, have many, many more altars or chapels, because in the old days, priests had to say Mass every day, and they needed a place to say Mass. That's not true here. But this chapel here is called the War Memorial Chapel. It was not in the planning of the cathedral, but during World War II, it was felt that there needed to be a place in the cathedral where the men and women who had sacrificed in America's wars could be honored. And some of the money for this chapel came from England, from the Queen of England and from people in England.